Welcome to today's Ascendo Reliability webinar. This is Fred Schenkelberg. And today I'm going to talk about one of the least appealing or sexy or enticing topic. And to some, it may seem, why do we need to do that? I listen just fine. And therein lies a problem. In my experience, there's a whole range of ability to listen. And it's one thing to hear the sound and translate it, or to see, read something and translate it into your own experience and so on. But it's another thing to actually listen really well. And I'm going to get into a little bit why that is so important for what we do. And it's a skill that we can learn and can practice and can improve. So I want to talk about that. Oops, if I click on the right thing, there we go. So we listen to get information, right? Where you listen to the weather forecast to find out whether it's going to rain or not. Here we got some rain last night. That was nice, a little bit. But we also listen at work to find out, all kinds of different things about what's going on in our organization, what are the priorities and so on. And I'll get more into that a little bit later. But we accumulate a lot of information by listening. And some of it's in discussions, some of it's in presentations, some in webinars, and in podcasts, and so on and on and on. It's one of our primary, if not the primary for some people, means of gathering information and having the source content to make decisions or to be entertained or whatever. But we listen for information. We also listen for direction. And I mentioned, what's going on at work? What's our vision? What's the priority for this week? Or do we have a change in direction for the development of our product or for the layout or product mix that we're doing in our factory? We listen for commands. When I was in the Army, when somebody said attention, it meant a specific physical response. And it became really clear when we were in a formation and marching, directions were pretty important to be paying attention to. Otherwise, you'd crash into the people around you. But we also look for direction and changes in particular when just chatting with somebody from procurement and they're saying, oh, we're getting ready to change this vendor. And if you're a reliability engineer in practice and you have procurement, you probably know that that's a signal you want to ask more questions. And usually something to be concerned about, at least in my experience. Although many times we get vendors that are just fine and change vendors are just fine, yet I have a long history of stories of how a simple change in vendor led to a lot of problems. So you need to listen for those. And we also listen for insights. We're going to bounce an idea off a colleague. We're going to get listen for ideas on a podcast or concepts or in a team meeting or in brainstorming or in all kinds of techniques that we use on a regular basis that we're looking for a way to solve a problem. I mean, we are engineers after all. And we work to solve problems. And many times you need to we were running our dishwasher last night and it was making an unusual sound, right? It was completely auditory. Opening it up, we found a couple of dishes that were loose and rattling into each other. And I don't think they would have gotten damaged, but it was not a sound we wanted to hear, these dishes clanking together. And they could have broken. So we were able to hear something, find recognize it as a problem, and then go solve it. But we listen for, what I'm trying to get at is a very wide range of reasons, right? So why do you listen? as a reliability engineer, what is it that you are listening for in your everyday experience? Maybe even today you heard something that was important for your program or projects. And I'm using the chat window primarily. Yeah, if you're a consultant, don't say you were listening to how much money the company has isn't willing to pay you, although that is important in some cases. How about you just help them solve the problem and you get a fair fee from that? All right, so I'm going to be pausing periodically, asking you questions. Hopefully, you can hear me. But why do we listen? In the book that Carl and I put together, and this is really an excerpt of, hey, Rochelle, good to see you. And yeah, understand the issues. I mean, when we get a field issue, it makes a lot of sense to talk to the customer, if it's possible to do it, to say what was happening at that moment. Part of the failure analysis process. Excellent. Um, the idea is to learn, right? And part of the book that Carl and I wrote on called The Process of Reliability Engineering included a whole series of steps, a framework of things that we should do before we create a reliability plan, our stated sequence of events and activities we're going to do this. And Brian's bringing up also some cultures are high context cultures. You have to really do active listening to understand the description of failure. Well, I've been on the receiving end of stuff where they say, well, it just isn't working, which is relatively vague. Well, what were you doing that led to it to fail? And it's a prompt to get more details for a variety of reasons in failure analysis. But you're right. And listening in general, when a lot of what I'm drawing on is in the literature as active listening. It's not putting on your headphones and listen to a podcast and then do the laundry or take out the trash or driving down the road. It's more of how do you participate as a listener, and we'll get into some of the hints and tips that I have that are from that field called active listening. But we try to learn, right? In part of the steps in creating a reliability plan is, well, where's the organization going? What's the senior management envision, no pun intended, is the objective in a reliability sense? Are we going to be the most reliable solution out there? Are we going to be middle of the road? Are we trying to reduce the cost of ownership, possibly? What is it that the overarching direction is for the organization? And then how does reliability work fit into that? And what we recommend is go talk to a handful of the senior management team and ask them, what is the vision? Where do we expect the reliability performance of our products to be in 5 years? If we don't have that, it's really hard to set appropriate goals for a project. Now, there's a whole nother set of listening we need to do in setting the goals. And we probably are not the one actually setting it, but we may be piecing it together from a bunch of other conversations. What's technically possible? What is the financial objectives? What kind of warranty percentage are we looking to not exceed? And so on and so on. How do we understand all of the different factors that go into, well, do we set this at 95% reliable in 2 years, or should it be 5 nines reliable in 2 years? And is reliability even the right goal measure? Should it be availability? And oftentimes it's those conversations that then coalesce into what we use as the 4-part reliability statement, right? It's 95% reliable over 2 years in outdoor handheld conditions worldwide. And it's, I'm thinking of like a phone, something like that could be a goal for that. Yet it's part of the process is to understand all of the different contributors to what's a feasible goal and to do that. And then we talk about doing a whole series of interviews and discussions and attending meetings and casual conversations at lunch or at the water cooler, if you have one of those things. I always gravitated towards the coffee pot myself. But areas of concern. It's the questions like what keeps you up at night? Where's the pain point? What's the most difficult area of this design? Do we have a confirmed, viable, proven vendor for this solution? All of those kinds of things are things that we're going to have to make decisions about within that group or organization. And it's worth catching those and understanding is there a need for reliability information out of those areas? In order to create a meaningful reliability plan, we need to understand what information the key decisions require. And I always use the example of, is this ready to ship? And are we on target for all the logistics, all the manufacturing setup, all of the sales and marketing type stuff? And is it going to be good enough? Well, to answer that question, it's folks like us that go out and figure out, are we good enough? What is the reliability expectation of this product? And so that we have to listen very deliberately in actual interviews with people, sit down with folks and ask them a series of questions. What's going on and what are you looking forward? What decisions are you have to make that you need better information? Would be a blunt way to ask it, but there's many other ways to do it. And what we're doing is trying to identify the key decisions. And it's from that list of the primary key decisions that are the $1 million decisions, ship or no ship, or delay or not delay, or change vendors or not change vendors, that have a lot of uncertainty generally associated with it. That's an attribute of what I would call a key decision. And is there something in the reliability realm that would help us help increase the ability to make the correct decision? Comparing two vendors' reliability performance for their solutions may be a pivotal piece of information of which one we decide to use. But then we also are learning things on the fly all through the program. And I have never worked on a program or a project or a design series or even in a factory that there were not changes as the project was being executed, developed, and deployed, and even manufactured. And we even have processes to manage changes. Now, the hard part oftentimes is the change is going to happen whether or not anybody says anything. And it's also a part of what do we need enough lead time in order to create the right information for? And it often becomes a challenge when we've got a stop production system and we need 3 weeks to do the testing. That often doesn't work that way. Gary's talking about listening is also determining what isn't being said that's important. Yeah. And Brian's, sorry about that about your wife. Hopefully we'll give you a couple of clues to help you figure it out. The idea, though, is we need to learn a lot in order to be effective in what we do. And a lot of that is through talking with other people. Now, if we only talk at other people, we're not listening. We're not going to figure out what the actual vision is. We could hallucinate it. We could set a goal and hope other people adopt it, but we could listen so that we get buy-in and get the goals that are actually meaningful to the rest of the organization. And identifying the key decisions, they're not our decisions. We may have a bias or preference which ones need more information. That's not important. It's the decisions that the program manager is making. It's the decisions the key engineers are making. It's those $1 million decisions. Uh, Scale it to whatever's appropriate for what's the most important decisions. It's the information that those need that we need to learn about. And listening acutely is one way to go about doing that. We also listen to understand. And the idea here is that it is similar to what I think it was what isn't being said is important that Gary mentioned. It's if we're going to rank order something, and I ask these questions when I do an assessment of an organization's reliability program is what's the priority, what's the rank order of these items in your program? The reliability, quality aspects of your product, the cost of the product, the time to market of your product, or the technology, the feature set that you have in your product. And I had one program manager, and she said, "Oh, that's easy. Time to market, time to market, time to market." What were the other ones? And she was being a little bit facetious. She knew these other things were important and had to be managed to some extent. Yet they would sacrifice the cost of the product and the feature set of the product and even the reliability of the product to some extent in order to ship on time. And it was a seasonal product. And if it wasn't on the shelf, it wasn't going to sell. And so she answered it with the message that this is our number one priority. All else is secondary. Right. And what she didn't say is that all these other things have limits or thresholds that go onto it. It was then understanding what are those thresholds? How do we balance getting time to market without overly compromising the reliability performance of the product? Where's the boundary? What kinds of activities in reliability areas would actually help get to time to market? How important then is that decision to ship? Is you're going to ship independent of you got anything working or not? No. All right. If it's perfectly working and you could ship it early, would you do that? Yes. But somewhere in between is that gray space. Is it good enough? And by understanding that part of it, which she didn't say was a priority from the start, is key for us to understand not only the priority ranking, but the implementation of that. Now, I want to do a quick aside here. I've talked about this before, but there's such a thing as making a full request. And part of listening, like if your boss comes in and says, "Hey, Fred, I want you to do this accelerated life test." Well, he didn't say it that way. He said, "I want you to figure out if this new product will last for 20 years in concrete." And I'm like, okay, I had no idea how to do this. It was my very first foray into reliability. But was that a complete request? All right. Did I listen completely to what was involved? My boss wanted me, there's two parts of this, who's involved, a task to figure out, will this last for 20 years? And I immediately asked if I could go to Italy, which is where the product was going to be installed, for 20 years to see if it actually works. And he said, no. So then he said, no, you have a deadline in 6 months. And so I kind of backed into where the deadline was. And after I figured out what I could do, I ran that back past him saying, is this what you had in mind? And would this answer your question? And then what format do you need? And it ended up being a short written report that we could send to the customer that was expecting this new product and a presentation. And that's not all the elements of a full request. Yet part of listening to when somebody makes a request to you, hey, could you look into this vendor for its reliability performance? Or how reliable is this motor? It's not always stated as a complete request. So listening, again, as Gary mentioned, what's not being said? Well, is there a deadline? What format do you want this in? level of detail do you want? Do you want a 4-year full detailed analysis of this new device, or do you want what the vendor says it's going to do? Is that good enough? Or do you want us to do some internal testing in our environment? What is it? What's the level of quality that you want for this question or this request to be complete? And so part of listening is also understanding what is being asked of you. And likewise, when you ask somebody else a request to do something for you, make sure that it is complete. Have them help you make sure that they understand exactly why it's that way. Yeah, and Brian, you're right. The face-to-face stuff, the body language stuff is really a lot of information is in body language and in inflection and voice patterns and stuff like that. It gets a bit more complicated when you go international with different cultures being involved, as many of you know, but it is important. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a bit. Right, I think I missed one there. And this one is probably the biggest reason we listen. And it's not about us learning or understanding. It's not only for us. If you've ever ran into somebody that you could talk to and you knew they were listening, they might have even been practicing some or many of the active listening techniques or ideas, you tend to trust them. Now, the trust part, we've talked about it many times, is critical to us as reliability engineers. We often are not the person making the decisions. Is this good enough or not? Or is this enough information or not? Or is this the right vendor to select or not? Now, we may have an opinion on those things and some evidence or information to share, but we're usually not ultimately the person making that decision. We influence other people. And it's a whole lot easier to influence people that trust you. One of the things to do is become a trusted advisor within your organization. And one of many steps in time that it takes to do it, is to actually listen, to be perceived as somebody by others that you actually listen. You understand the requests, you understand the complexities, you understand all of these aspects that they're trying to convey to you, and you get it. And we can do that by really listening well. And part of it, even just the body language of it, even just listening and asking open-ended questions and just being there to let them vent if that's what's involved, it allows them to recognize that you are actually listening. Right? We'll go into a few of the ways that people can listen poorly. And I think that would be it's lots of examples in that. And Carl's bringing up, it's long-term listening or building trust is the foundation of long-term business success. It's also pivotal for us to influence decisions with the information we create. So if I went off and did this reliability test for this new product, wrote the report and just filed it and never actually explained what I was doing or listened to what the criteria was or understood what the environmental factors were and stresses that this product was going to see, there would have been little to no credence of this test being useful or not. It may by chance had been, but by the process of fully understanding the client's needs or the customer's needs and my boss's needs in order to meet the requirements of building and designing a product that would work, it allowed me to create a test that they could trust. And part of it is that they trusted the work I was doing. And part of that was listening. A good part of it was listening. And I learned a whole lot in that process about really understanding the request, not just going off and doing what I wanted to do, but doing what was actually expected. And I wouldn't have known what was expected unless I listened. So I foreshadowed this a little bit. What are examples of poor listening? What have you run into? Maybe even today. Um, I have to scroll back. We got a bunch of comments in here, but somebody mentioned their wife thinks they don't listen well. So, what would be the evidence of that? Why did she say that? What examples have you seen at work of somebody that really is not a good listener? She has to repeat herself. Yeah, yeah, that happens. Um, yeah, somebody has all the answers. Another good one, Gary. I don't know how many times I've walked into an FMEA and somebody's, why are we going to spend 2 hours on this? I know what the top issue is. Let's just go solve that. And then they prove themselves completely wrong after an hour of working with the group. Yeah, Marta, exactly. Yeah. Interrupting. And it is a skill to recognize that some people need to form their thoughts before they start speaking. I always thought they didn't understand the question, so I just ask it again. Yet working with folks that said, wait a sec, give me a little space here so I can figure out how to ask your question. Yeah, being forceful or rude or put them in a bind, you're not listening, you're just expecting the answer you want. Yeah, yeah, all good ones. Perception of authority, um, and there's many others, right? All right, here's a couple I've run into over the years. Just keep talking. I was at a conference once and we were sitting, a couple of us were sitting there and chatting, and another person came up and was wanted to ask a question. And my colleague immediately wanted to find out how much money they had for consulting, and just went on and gave him all kinds of advice all over the map. And I was like, we didn't even heard the problem yet. And, interrupted it, the one that wouldn't stop talking, and said, no, we asked them a question. How do you like the podcast? How do you like Ascendo Reliability? And it's really hard for them to tell us if you just keep talking. And it was, if we go to a meeting and, oh, we'll take questions at the end, and then never get to the end. You run long on your presentation. Oh, sorry, we're out of time. Well, you're part of doing a presentation or making a proposal is that active listening is, are there concerns? Are there improvements? Are there ways to make this really happen that we're missing? And so on and so on. But if we just keep talking and then don't get the result we wanted, well, then that's a problem. There was I think it's the last holiday where this woman's boss was on the phone all the time, and she's saying, I need to talk to you. And then his phone rings and it's like, no, I got to listen to my phone. She finally took her shoe off and smashed the phone to get his attention. But he never did end up listening till the very end of the movie. But the idea is something my mom used to tell me, and I'm sure others have heard this before, is you got two ears and one mouth for a reason. It's our activities of actually listening. And it's not like our ears vibrate or turn blue or some other way a person knows that you're actively listening. It's your body posture and so on. We'll talk about some of those in a second. But the idea is that if you're not ready to listen, then it's really hard to do it. Carl, looks like your mom said the same thing my mom got. And I tried telling her once that I could listen while I was sleeping. So does that those 8 hours count? And she said, no. All right. The other way to do it is it's something called confirmation bias, right? If there's an outcome I want, say we pick this vendor versus that vendor, and all of my information and everything that other people are saying is some of it it aligns with that objective and others don't. If I only pay attention to and only listen to the parts that support my bias, then I'm only listening to half of it. If somebody objects to it, what say I want vendor A, and they say, well, what about vendor B, X, Y, Z? And if I just dismiss it or put it away or ignore it or battle against it, whatever, only because it's different than what I want, then I'm missing the opportunity that may well be the right decision, may well be a very supportive direction to go. But if I'm not even looking for that, and looking is a different skill set for us, but if we're not listening for that, if we're not understanding the pushback in any form or fashion because it doesn't support what we want, then yeah, we're done, right? It's obvious we're not listening. Another one that I've run into is when you get, is back to that movie examples where this person was, well, I'm going to listen to my email, I'm going to listen to my phone while trying to have a meaningful conversation with you. We're not good at that. And it signals to the person that you're talking to or listening to that you're not actually listening. You're looking at your phone, you're looking at your email, you're checking your watch, you're signaling that you're not really there. And so part of it is when you're listening well, you are actually totally listening. And we'll get into some more what that means in the next segment. And one that I heard about long time ago, and you've seen them, I'm sure you've run into this, that you're saying, oh, we need to do work with vendor A. And you pause to swallow or get a sip of coffee, which what I would typically do. And somebody that doesn't like that idea jumps in and rattles off 47 points of why vendor B is way better. Bam, 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 bam. And you say, and the next point is that here's the final results of the study. Here's the information. Let me get that on the screen for you. You pause again and they fire again. So they weren't listening to anything in your presentation. They were only waiting for a break in the conversation so they could fire away all of their arguments. And I'm guilty of doing that too. It's sort of like Marta talked about, is that somebody will cut you off, is that you pause just for a second and they want to talk over you, they want to counter their arguments, they want to take credit for your arguments, whatever it is. They're not listening to you. They're just waiting for that break, and when it's feasible for them to break in and take over or make their own points. Or they just want to just change the topic because they don't want to listen to this anymore. So be very cautious when you're, especially if you're getting feedback on, say, you're doing a presentation, says, hey, I want to talk to you about your presentation. There's a couple of things I noticed that you could really improve on. Or somebody, you send them a report and saying, I appreciate the report. There's a few things I need to talk to you about that would improve your ability for other people to read it. Those kinds of feedbacks are very personal. This is the effort we put into it, all the decisions we made to create this content of some sort. And now somebody wants to criticize it. You need to really prepare yourself to listen. And if you are just going to defend the colors and fonts and the sizes and the layout and how you set it up and what, just read to page 14, you get everything you want. Instead of adding an executive summary at the start, maybe that's the only feedback they have for you. But if you don't even let them get to providing the feedback because you're putting up a bunch of defenses, you're obviously not listening. And so those are ways that we can do that, not listen well. And you may recognize it in some of your previous conversations, or you can recognize it in other people. And there's a not a lot you can do about some of them, but you can start building that trust so that they want you to actually to listen, and they recognize that you are listening, and they'll let you pause or they'll let you stay on topic, stuff like that. But it starts back with that trust piece of it, and it's not automatic, it's not immediate by any means. And I don't think this is anything that I see in politics or in casual conversations yet. There's a handful of people I could name right now that I would say they are great listeners, that I can talk to them, they will listen, they will help me form ideas, they'll help me solve problems, they'll help me let me talk through it. But there's not many in my world, in my experience. Let's see, strategic or silence, yeah. um the pause, it's a skill. And Brian, you're right. A lot of people, if you pause, they're just going to they're already got their arguments lined up and ready to go. The issue is that by being a really good listener, it does a couple of things. It helps other people learn how to listen themselves. And two is, when they're done doing whatever they're doing, right? And you now fully understand where they're at, where they're coming from, and how they're doing, and they know that you actually listened well to them, they may well, not always, they may well be able to listen back, right? And hear your side of it. It takes an immense amount of patience with some people. And it takes a whole lot of self-discipline and practice to listen to bad news, for example, if you're getting a critique of some sort, and actually, instead of defending yourself, is to understand their position. That's attributes of what I would call a great listener. All right. So how do we do it? And I mentioned a few of these as we're going. But number one is you have to want to listen. You can't walk into a conversation or a meeting and know that you're going to be on email, know that you're going to be checking your phone, knowing that you already have your mind set up, and whatever they say is, I just need to figure out how to counter their arguments. You're already established that you're not going to listen to what they have to say, right? You have to be in a frame of, I want to know what I'm hearing. I want to understand what's behind it. I want to understand what's not being said. And that takes really active listening to understand it. You have to be willing to do that. And one of the essential techniques of this, and Carl's been talking about this pause and deliberate silence type thing, is to take a breath. It's not a sigh of frustration. It's just take a good breath, relax your shoulders, relax your arms, take a really good sense of clear your mind. It's like a yoga thing is, take a breath and clear your mind. And it's almost going into a meditative state. But the idea is that if you have 40 things on your mind that you need to deal with or move on with or get moving or get your request in or set directions or whatever, you're not ready to listen, right? It might not be a good time for that conversation, but you can deliberately say, hey, I need to go talk to Sarah and understand her insights on this accelerated test. how does this product really work so that we know that what the failure mechanism is and are our assumptions correct? Now, I could go in all biased up and ready to tell her what I'm going to do. Or I could go say, how does this product work and how does it not work so that I can evaluate whether it'll last 20 years or not? What's the actual fundamental mechanisms going on here that we expect to fail or degrade over time? Which is completely different than going in and saying, oh, I'm just going to throw it in a chamber and cycle it and hope it works. Which cycling had nothing to do with the one that example I'm thinking of. But by talking to the designer of the product, I got to understand that the oxidation of these polymers was causing chain scissioning, which limits its ability to perform. Oh, I didn't know that. Tell me more. Which is a whole lot different conversation than if I wasn't ready to go learn something. The other technique, and Carl talked about this in the book a little bit, is the picture the word spoken. It slows you down. He's like, visualize it as being in a book, or if it's a color, visualize that. If it's a product, visualize the product. Is deliberately slow your brain down so that you hear and better understand the sentences and words that are being spoken. And another part of this, though, is if somebody's really passionate or really angry, it's how do we understand that? Part of it, one technique for doing this is to match them. So if they're agitated and standing up, stand up and meet them on the same level. If they're loud, be loud. If they're quiet, be quiet. If they're really don't want to talk about it, pause. As Carl's been talking about in some of these comments, is that silence is a great way to get somebody to open up eventually. And very few people like dead air, but we're not in a radio station, right? We're not on a podcast. If there's nothing going on, people are going to tune out. But if you're in a one-to-one conversation and you don't say anything, it really puts the burden on everybody to fill that gap. You may or may not get what you want out of it, but it prompts the start of the discussion. But understanding, where is this person? What is motivating their responses? What is driving their thoughts right now? What's behind the information or advice or direction I'm getting? And some of the techniques are asking clarifying questions, bringing up, what do you mean by that? How do I interpret that? What does that look like when it's done? How does that actually work? And part of that is in our posture. And I think Carl, in one of his comments there, brought up one of these, is it's lean forward and focus. Now, if they're leaned back in their chair, that may look domineering or be perceived as domineering. So if they're sitting back in their chair with their legs crossed, sit back in your chair and cross your legs. That's what I mean by mirroring their posture, right? It's a subtle way in body language to say, I am in the same presence you are. If they lean forward, you lean forward. If they are gesturing a lot when they're talking, you gesture when you're talking, and so on. It's a way to signal that you're actually paying attention and that you're actually listening. And the other part is instead of firing back with your arguments or, you should have read to page 14 or defending yourself, well, what do you do instead? Ask open-ended questions and clarifying questions. Ask for details. It's, tell me more about that. Or I didn't quite understand this part about change scissioning. What is that? And then when I was asking those questions, I was also asking, well, how does that work? Where's the oxygen coming from that causes this to occur? Does it need to be at a certain temperature? Is there an activation energy? And so on. But it was conversation context that mattered. At first, it was, I'm trying to build a test and I need to understand how it fails. So I accelerate that properly. And this is for, here's the context. Can you help me understand how this product works? And she was busy. And by asking the open-ended questions, how does this fail? What do you think over 20 years is going to happen to this product? And then diving deeper into fully understanding what she's talking about. And that hour went quickly, and I got way more information than I would have if I already went in with my plan and said, this is how I'm going to do it, obviously. Right. But part of it is to encourage the other person to talk. Right. And if you're talking, they're not, and you're not listening and you're not learning anything. And in this case, my example of learning how this product worked or didn't work was essential in order to create an appropriate accelerated test. But the idea is that if you find yourself in a conversation, even just a random conversation with a complete stranger, if you ask an open-ended question, you're probably going to have a discussion. If you make a statement, they may or may not respond to it. But if you and by nature, I'm an introvert, yet by learning to just listen, it has opened up so many other people and their ideas and motivations and insights and so on. And I've learned so much over my career because I've learned how to listen early on and paid attention to it. And it's part, the bits and bobs on this slide and the last slide are part right out of the book, The Process of Reliability Engineering. I think I have a reference to it in a little bit. But the idea is that there's things you can do. It takes practice. Believe me, it really does take practice to learn how to improve how well you listen. And it goes back to that trust piece, right? If we can build trust with the people we work with, that they know you listen to them, is much more likely they're going to listen to you when you're making recommendations or providing advice or looking for information. Right. And then how do you keep this going? How do you develop this practice? And I've talked about this a bunch of times, and I've drawn a complete blank what book it was, but you need to do deliberate practice. And that's not just in your own head. It's ask for feedback, get a coach. If you have a great conversation with somebody and you really thought you were listening well, circle back with them, to use a vague corporate term, but ask them, I'm trying to improve my ability to listen. How did I do? Do you feel like you were heard? Did I listen well? And that might be somebody you ask that you trust, right? Somebody that you would expect that they would give you an honest answer. And you got to ask for that, right? Another way to do it is ask a trusted friend or colleague that when you're in a conversation and you need to listen, ask them to watch the conversation. Just pay attention to how well I listened. Did I interrupt them? Did I counter them? Did I shut them down at some point? What did I do or not do? What made that happen? Or what did I do that elicited more information than I would have gotten otherwise? Ask somebody to watch you and practice and give you feedback on it. That's what I mean by deliberate practice, is get a coach, essentially. And you can create coaches for all kinds of things in your day-to-day work. You don't need to hire somebody for this. And it's a great way to learn a behavior change, which is incredibly difficult to do. And getting somebody that helps you see what you're doing well and not doing well helps you understand and improve your in the moment type activities. And so the idea of listening well is so vital to so many aspects of what we do, from understanding the vision to understanding the requirements for getting a good test report out, or a meaningful direction for a decision, or what are the key decisions, or what are the boundaries or constraints, or what are the deadlines. Those are all things we listen for. And sometimes we need to go get it, right? Go ask people for interview or go have a discussion with somebody to elicit that information. But if we're not going to listen, why even bother? So it's something we can and really, really should get really good at, is listening such that it's obvious that we are, right? And that they are very comfortable with what that we are listening well. All right. We're not looking for ammunition. We're not looking for faults. We're not looking for weaknesses. We're just listening. We're looking to learn something, for information, to understanding, those kinds of things. So hopefully you heard something today, no pun intended, that you may want to take on, or you already do, and good on you for that. And I'll stay on. Oh, before I sign off, I know that a couple months ago, before the event started, there was a couple people online, and I asked for, what kind of topics would you like upcoming, and one of them was the idea of AI, generative AI, and reliability engineering. And so I reached out to Enrico Belmonte, who I know uses a lot of generative AI in his work for all kinds of reasons. And he's willing to do a webinar on that. So he'll be the second Tuesday in July. It's reliability engineering and genetic AI is his topic. And Chris, last month we had connective problems, and Chris couldn't get connected on into the Zoom for whatever reason. He was getting could not connect to the server in the US, and that was a problem. So we're going to try again next month. It's been rescheduled to the fourth Tuesday this month. I think that's, I'm sorry, the third Tuesday, because he has a conflict the fourth. So June 16th. It's a little bit out of our rhythm, but it's still at 8 o'clock Pacific time. And it's all your failures could be caused by maintenance. And as many of you know, Chris does really cool webinars. So hopefully we'll get to see that. And I know a handful of you on the line already have shown interest in this topic. So it should be a good one. And we hope to do that. It's next week. So those are all good stuff. So I'll stay on the line if there's any comments or questions. Yeah, Brian, July 14th for the AI one. Thanks, Marta. Hey, thanks, Brian. Thanks for the participation. Yeah, Rochelle is, whatever, everyone wants to be the smartest in the room. Well, if they're all that smart, you can learn a whole lot, right? And by really understanding what they're doing and by eliciting all of the details, by asking open-ended questions and for clarifications and so on, they're going to understand that you're just as smart as they are because you can ask great questions. And that's a part of being there and creating that trust. Yeah, and Brian, you're right. Going back through some of the comments, is people will just step over you and start talking. It does happen. It's our ability to, by our example, is listen well, so that hopefully that'll help others do the same. All right, got a couple of comments in there. Thanks, Rita. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Brian.